Thank you. Yeah, yeah. All right, good. Okay, so I've just been prompted. I'm going to record the meeting actually as well, and so haven't been able to attend yet will have the opportunity to see the video, and I'm going to have it up on my website as well in due course. So if any of you are not able to meet the end of the meeting, can't stay to the end of the meeting, not a problem, it will be recorded. So I think we'll get started, and just a few housekeeping points then. So as people come in, I will just mute them, just in order for us to be able to continue our conversation, don't get too much background noise. And also, I'll just ask you if you could to turn off your videos, and just so that Kanchan and I will be presenting the webinar today, and that will enable everyone just to be able to focus on the slides really, because we have some slides here, and we just wanted to talk about those with you. So we'll get started. And so again, people are joining, fantastic. Thank you so much everyone for attending, and very, very happy to be presenting to you today on something I think that's very, very close to my heart, emotional intelligence. And so let me talk a little bit about myself really here, and the reason why I'm interested in emotional intelligence. As some of you know, I've spent 30 years, I guess, in the corporate world, and really seen so many instances where emotional intelligence was, severely lacking. And so I felt that this was a really interesting area of study, because it's something that when people realize the benefits of it translates to so many areas of their lives. There's so much untapped potential around the benefits of emotional intelligence. And so this is an interactive session. I'm happy for you to put some notes in the chat function. We'll also be having a couple of polls as well. We'll have time for questions at the end, so that any burning questions that you have, we'll just have some time at the end, and I welcome any questions that you do have. And so let me also introduce my co-presenter, Kanchan Singh Mehta. Kanchan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Paul, and good evening to everyone. I'm really pleased to be over here. Just a bit about myself. I'm a Chartered Secretary, Associate of CGIC Canada, and a governance professional. I moved to Canada less than a year ago and currently working as a client success and corporate success specialist at Delphia. I'm here to share my experience and thoughts on EQ and how I realized that it's more important than IQ. So I realized the importance of EQ a bit late in my life, and now I can only say that it's one of the key aspects for one's overall success. Having completed a lot of these professional qualifications in my early days of college and as a chartered student, I always thought completing exams and having great scores is what we should strive for. And I measured success only through these scores and thought that others would do this too. However, with time, I realized that my approach was wrong, and what was lacking, in spite of being a bright student, was recognizing my emotions and directing them towards honing my interpersonal skills and the ability to have decision making skills. So, my message over here is that it's never too late to realize and start working towards it. What we're going to achieve is a great sense of satisfaction and great results. Yes,
Thanks
Paul.
very much, Kanchan. That's a great point you made, actually, that it's never too late to learn. I think that's a key principle that we want to explore more today as well. And just having IQ and technical expertise, as you rightly said, Kanchan, you discover later on that that's not just everything, is it really? Technical expertise on its own is not enough. It's really only part of the picture. And we've worked in many different environments, different countries, and one common factor I can say is that the language of emotional intelligence is universal. It translates languages, barriers. It applies to any industry that you can think of. And so these soft skills, they're not really taught in academic courses particularly, we don't learn them at school, which is scandalous, and we often don't learn them in our workplace, but they're every bit as important as the certificates that we hang on our walls. And you know, they define your character. It's your ability as well to respond in a positive way to situations. It's about your resilience, your communication, your adaptive skills. You know, the range of soft skills is absolutely vast. And so in my view and my experience in the corporate world, if you want to be an influencer, which means having that credibility to be a trusted advisor within your organization, of course you need technical skills, but you also need that ability, that emotional intelligence, to mark yourself out as a leader. So it's really about the combination of technical skills, but also going beyond the technical skills into those skills that will define you as an influencer and as a leader. And so a lot of the areas that we'll talk about today, some of these elements will tend to sort of blur into each other. So I sort of make no apologies for repeating some of the concepts that we talk about here, but hopefully you'll come away from this webinar with enough insights from this discussion to really take back to your organization some strategies about how you can be an influencer and how you can improve your emotional intelligence. So with that in mind, and I'm just having a few more people attending as well, which is marvelous. So just bear with me a second as we get some more people coming in. Okay, so Kanchan, would you like to talk about the objectives for today's session?
Yeah, sure. So in today's session, we would identify some of the key non-technical skills which a person requires in the professional workplace, how we can apply these to a given situation and make benefits out of our practical experience through this. And considering the evolving status of EQ, these skills are in high demand. So we consider the role of EQ and leadership in the modern workplace and look at these as two separate streams. So they are intertwined with each other. And we have approached this from the principle of being governance professionals. However, I think that the principles we talk about here today can work in most professional roles. So you can consider how the points raised apply to your own experience and position.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point because these are universal skills, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I want to go right into, I said this would be an interactive session, so I'm going to get you guys working now as well. And I wanted to launch a poll here around whether you have received training in EQ. So I'd be very interested to see what your views are. So I'll just give you a little bit of time, a minute or so, just to answer the poll there. Who has received training in EQ, either through work or at a course of study? Okay. Okay, so we're getting some answers coming through here. And I'll share the results with you. Just give you a couple more seconds to complete your answers. Okay. Okay. So you'll be very interested to see here then that around about just over 1/3 have received some form of training in EQ, but a whopping 64%, 2/3, have not received any EQ training in work or at any course of study. So I think this just highlights to me that there really is a need to understand and develop emotional intelligence and maybe apply it within the workplace as well as a discipline and for people to be aware of it. So thanks everyone for that, the first poll. And so what is emotional intelligence? You know, let's talk about what is the concept of emotional intelligence. One thing I can say is that research shows that EQ, and I'm going to call it emotional quotient going forward, it really is a factor that sets high-performing individuals sets out high-performing individuals and high achievers aside from the rest of the crowd. And so really understanding and developing your emotional intelligence is essential if you want to successfully progress in your career, because not only will you reap the rewards by enhancing your own performance, but you'll also foster strong relationships with others. And that, of course, enables you to collaborate better and to achieve more. And so EQ, what actually is EQ? Well, it's really part of our physiological makeup, and it's the ability to recognize the emotions that we're feeling and be able to express those emotions through appropriate behavior. So note the connection between emotions and behavior. Being able to, if you like, being aware, self-aware of your emotions enables you to effectively distance or step outside of them as if you were a casual observer. And in doing so, it really reduces its intensity. It gives you the time to manage those emotions in order to regulate your behavior. And this means that you're in control of your emotions and how you experience and how you express those emotions. And that means that you can build responses that are more mature and more productive. But it's also not just about your response, but it's also about being really alive to the responses and aware of the emotions of others, which means being sensitive to the feelings of people around you. They're not going to tell you how they're feeling, but communication of emotions, as I'm sure you all know, takes place in a variety of ways. The most important of those being body language, such as facial expressions, posture, tone of voice. These provide clear signals about how the person is feeling, and if you're able to pick up on those signals, it will enable you to develop rapport, which of course enhances your ability to build productive relationships. So EQ is a learned skill. I mean, it is part of our psychological and physiological makeup, and it's part of our personality. Although the good news is that our general personality and IQ tends, generally speaking, to be fairly fixed at an early age. But research has shown that EQ is something that you can develop by practice. And so it is a learned skill, and it does take a lot of practice. But of course, it's something that if you are able to achieve it and work at it, the results can be astounding. And like I say, it's about the internal part of managing your own emotions, but also being able to maintain good relationships. And that's the external part, which in turn will help you to be able to solve problems clearly and when you're under pressure. And so, Kanchan, I know that we've talked about this before, that when you moved to Canada, you've recently moved to Canada, and I'm sure that there must have been a whole roller coaster of emotions related to that move. Can you tell us a little bit more about your experiences?
Sure. So before moving to Canada, I was in the Middle East in Kuwait for 4 years. And before Kuwait, I was in India. I'm born and brought up in India. So moving to Canada was not an easy decision because for many reasons. One of them being we had close ties in Kuwait. So moving to Canada was a win-win decision because of the personal and professional growth. We knew that this would be a great place to raise our kid. So we arrived in Toronto early this year in March. Yes, right before the COVID pandemic struck and everything came to a halt. It was difficult to even set up the house. In fact, we bought all our furniture online as well. So on the career front, it was difficult to even get in touch with people. So there was no limit to the range of emotions that we went through. So the approach that we took and was to just keep optimistic and taking every day one at a time. I know that it does sound very cliche and it's just a simple rule and it worked for us and I'm sure that it would work for many of us.
I think the point you raised, Kanchan, about optimism is something that is so important today, isn't it? Because we're all facing a situation now that is really unprecedented in most of our lives. And how do we get past that? And can we see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's about being optimistic for the future, isn't it? So I think your point around optimism is a key EQ skill, isn't it, really, to be able to look beyond your current situation and look at things can get better. You know, emotions are complex. They can reflect pleasure, displeasure, they can elicit extreme or even minor reactions. And of course, they vary from individual to individual, but also, of course, they can vary within the person depending on their emotional state at the time. Something that may be a mild irritant today could cause me to fly off the handle another day. And this is maybe because I may be tired or stressed or just plain hungry, or it could be a myriad of other reasons. So those emotions, they do lead to a physiological response, which can be things such as shaking, sweating, or in cases of fear, a rush of an adrenaline, the fight or flight response. And that really represents the primeval nature of emotions, which of course in ancient times were used to provide information that could potentially help us to survive. Now, our brain still provides that information, although it may not necessarily be a life or death situation. It still results in a physical sensation. For example, when you feel your palms sweat and your heart racing in situations of fear, many people are afraid of public speaking and shy away from it because of the fear which causes those physiological reactions. I know that when I first began public speaking, I had a small knot in the bottom of my stomach, an empty feeling of that nervousness. And I can still feel nervous sometimes when I'm talking, but I still managed to control it. And so part of it is just understanding what your body is doing and thinking of ways that you can overcome that. And really, so understanding and managing those emotions is critical, because we don't want to become a slave to our emotions or our impulses, or emotional hijacking, as it's sometimes called, because we want our rational brain to be in charge, not our emotions. Consider when you get really angry, our emotional response is, our brain is wired for our emotional response to be quicker than our intellectual response. So when we fly into a blind rage, we're not actually acting rationally. And that's why often actions that are taken in anger will lead to huge regrets later. There's a famous Chinese proverb that states, if you're patient in one moment of anger, you will escape 100 days of sorrow. I really like that proverb because it's so true. We all come to regret things that we've done in moments of anger. And you can't control events, but you can control how you react to it. And you can let these emotions and the physiological response get the better of you, or you can overcome it by working at it and just by practicing. And so that's the point, really, that a number of the strategies that we'll talk about today, you're not suddenly going to become experts in EQ by the end of this seminar. However, I hope that you will have some insights, at least to enable you to move forward. And it does, like I say, it does take practice, but it's worth the effort, because emotions are fundamental to who we are, to our personality. They provide us with a rich way to experience life. They may not always serve our best interests, but being able to control them will enhance every aspect of your life. And I know, Kanchan, I wanted to ask you as well. I know you're one of the calmest people I know. How do you address situations when you feel really angry? What strategies do you use?
Okay, that's a good question, Paul. So I'm a mother of a 5-year-old naughty boy, and I get many reasons to get angry. So that being said, what works best for me is step back, take a deep breath, and then run from that situation. Only for that much time, obviously. So revisit the problem when I'm more calm. Another great strategy that I learned from this book, Art of Happiness by Dalai Lama, is to understand the perspective of the opposite person. What this means is reacting to their action, step into their shoes and think what made them act that way. By doing this, what we're doing is not driving all our emotions towards a negative direction, but being more considerate towards the opposite person. I find this strategy as something really great.
Thank you very much, Kanchan. I think you mentioned a great point there, and we'll be exploring that later, is seeing the other person's viewpoint, having that empathy with the other person. Sometimes that can be a difficult thing to do, and you can really only do that in moments when you're calm. And so being able to, as you mentioned, step away from that situation, calm yourself down, taking the deep breath, and then being able to think things through in a more rational manner. It sounds easy, but it really isn't, is it? We all know that how difficult a challenge that can be. But this is why having that sort of greater awareness and sensitivity as to how you're feeling is information that you can use to your advantage, and it's going to enhance your ability to really make objective decisions. And even when you're under pressure, they say never drive when you're emotional. And I think also never make important decisions when you're emotional as well. It's also going to help you to develop a learning mindset. And this is a fascinating area, the learning mindset. It's a whole area of study in itself. It means that when you react to mistakes, you use it as a learning opportunity and not beat yourself up about them, because your self-talk will be much more positive. And this is going to help you also to build your resilience when things are not going your way. And of course, also it helps you to having that learning mindset. It means that you're much better at receiving feedback in a positive sort of non-personal manner, and use that information to improve your skills rather than reacting negatively or defensively to perceived criticism. We've all had that really in the workplace, where we've had criticism or feedback that we don't particularly like. And again, it's about how you respond to it. So having that ability to be able to adopt a learning mindset, very, very important. What other benefits, Kanchan, have you seen from having strong EQ?
Well, there are a lot of benefits to having strong EQ. I think that the most important one would be managing your stress and coping with life's daily challenges. We get more clear about our own purpose in life and our mission and our actual motivation. I believe that it also develops our communication skills, and which includes obviously active listening. So we become more independent and assertive, and we are able to negotiate outcomes that work for you rather than being dictated or controlled by others. So it also makes us more flexible and agile, which means that the ability to make changes that life inevitably brings. And it makes us more empathetic as well, and it enhances and enriches our relationships both inside and outside of work, and it establishes rapport quickly with others, and it just helps us to become more influential and confident in the professional environment. I believe these are some of the benefits of EQ.
Thanks very much, Kansha. I think with all those benefits, it's apparent that it's no wonder that EQ is so important. And so for all of you on the call, I congratulate you, because this is your step to understanding EQ. And I'm sure you'll agree that this subject, there's so many aspects to it, it deserves deeper analysis. And yet far too often people just plod along unaware that with a little bit of effort and guidance, they can make vast improvements to their life. And that's what really drew me to this. It really is a fascinating area, because it can make fundamental improvements to your life, just really knowing and being aware of some of the strategies that can be used. And so I think that when we talk about these skills as well, we're focusing on the professional workplace, and we'll be discussing and introducing the range of non-technical skills that you'll need in the workplace. And I've grouped them into two categories. Firstly, the leadership skills, and then secondly, the emotional intelligence, the EQ skills. In practice, of course, these skills really merge into one another. They are interchangeable. I mean, one thing is for sure, the two categories are mutually dependent. You cannot have one without the other. You cannot really be a true leader if you don't possess emotional intelligence. So Kanchan, we're going to be talking about leadership shortly. How would you define, what would you see as the attributes of a leader?
Well, I think a leader is someone who has passion about their role. They have the courage to speak up and do the right thing, have confidence in what they're bringing to the table, having integrity, honesty, self-motivation. These are a few of the traits of a perfect leader. And being conscious of what you bring to the table, these elements so nicely they harmonize with EQ. And I strongly believe that a leader, one more definition of a leadership, which I strongly believe in, is that a leader is someone who maintains a fine balance between the business goals and his team's personal goals. So he is someone who takes care of both the goals and not just bends towards only one.
I really, excuse me, I really like that concept that leadership is about your team as well, not just about you as an individual. I think that's very, very important. So yeah, thanks very much for that, Kanchan. And we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence as well. We've talked about some of the definitions of EQ. So I'll just summarize briefly that we'll be looking at it within the context of the professional environment. And of course, it is about, within that work environment, recognizing and regulating your emotions as well. And so dealing with those stressful situations that we inevitably find in the workplace in a calm way, and how you manage yourself and how you manage your relationships. And so it is, of course, about being a good communicator, being aware of body language, active listening to understand, and having a positive attitude. You talked, Kanchan, about that whole need to have a positive attitude when you face challenges in your life, when you're moving country, for example. That's very, very important. And we'll be looking at those attributes in a work context. And organizations with people with high EQ actually do perform better. That's not just a concept, it's actual research that shows that organizations that have that, employees that have strong EQ, they do perform better. So relationship building is one of, in my view, a key attribute. It's about taking time to invest in people, get to know them, get to listen to them, identify their needs, and seek ways in which you can satisfy them, and developing those social skills so that you can easily talk to people that you don't know very well. So Kanchan, what approach do you use in you started a new role now. What do you use in developing relationships? What strategies do you employ?
Well, I believe that being appreciative, firstly, is very important towards your colleagues, towards your seniors, to see that what they are contributing to the organization. I practice a lot of active listening skills. I feel as a newcomer to a company, it's very important that we practice the active listening skills and listen and learn and unlearn a lot of things, and build trust and naturally enhance the relationship with colleagues and seniors. Written communication is also important. So obviously, I emphasize on that. And being patient and having strong relationships obviously do not happen overnight. So I believe that the time investment is really important, and we need to be patient for the results, which to a certain extent I am not, but I'm really working towards that. And I hope that I be more patient in future. So I believe, yeah. So to sum it up, good relationships, building trust, having respect for your colleagues, seniors, honest communication, and believing in yourself. Lastly, that's it. That's, I believe, this.
Yeah,
These are the things which I am following right now.
they're great points. And I think you raise a very important point there, is that these take time. You can't build these great relationships overnight. You've got to have a sense of perspective around it, and you've got to cultivate them and work on it over time as well. So yeah, some super points you made there. And so when we build relationships, of course, we then build a degree of credibility. And one of the other areas as well that can really help you to develop that credibility and that influence is around expert judgment and applying your experience and your knowledge into situations. And again, Kanchan, how have you found, what particular attributes have you found in when you've had to make judgment calls? What have you drawn on?
I believe making judgment calls is really your inner natural instinct. Obviously, knowing the matter and just learning what really is in the background is important than being impatient and drawing conclusions. So I believe this approach should be a great strategy to have these judgment calls. And I believe that understanding your company, knowing the business, having really reliable source of information is what is important before you give any advice. And forward thinking is also important, which I think can definitely help a person in expert judgments and strong analytical skills to obviously weigh up the various factors, the pros and cons, thought leadership with a well-reasoned solution. So I think an expert judgment enables you to justify why you made that certain call at that particular time. So of course, it also depends on your courage to make that call.
To make the call, yes. And you're right, that it's sometimes having the courage to make the call, and that's about your own personal values and your own beliefs as well. But also, of course, how do you then articulate the points that you have raised to justify your call? You know, you have to therefore be a good communicator, and that brings us nicely to our sort of next attribute around leadership, because communication and negotiation, I think, are very, very key skills for a good leader. And it's not just written skills, it's all, well, it's both, it's oral and written skills. And I know as an example, in my role as a governance professional, it was about minute taking skills, and so being able to record discussions and therefore being an active listener as well. So it is really about it's a two-way process, because communication is not just about talking well to people and presenting, it's also the ability to listen and seek first to understand and then be understood. And so being an active listener, I think, giving all of your attention and not allowing any distractions as well. Summarize what the person is telling you as well. As I say, seek to understand, because it is about not just hearing, it's about understanding. So therefore, avoid the temptation when you're listening to interrupt just to get your point across, because 70% of good communication is about listening. They say we have two ears and one mouth, and that's the you know, the process behind that. That's the thinking around good communication. But it's also, of course, being able to negotiate as well. Having good negotiation skills. As a good communicator, you want to be able to then develop those skills to be able to negotiate so that you can ensure the rights of all stakeholders are adequately protected, particularly where they have divergent interests. And that was something, as a corporate governance professional, was very key for me, because I represented a number of different stakeholders and I had to be able to represent their interests. And so when you're working with different businesses and different areas that have different interests, you need to understand where they're coming from and be able to negotiate for hopefully a win-win scenario, because it isn't just, negotiation isn't about I win, you lose. It's about ensuring that both parties can walk away from the process knowing that they've had a fair deal and that doesn't damage the longer term future. So I think that's something that's often forgotten about in negotiation, because ultimately you're going to have a relationship with that person, most likely. And so therefore you need to be able to finish a negotiation in a position where you've got good relationships intact. And so that's where I see communication. And as you mentioned, Kanchan, as well, it's also having the courage to speak out when you really need to around your value system.
So, Paul, when we're speaking, thanks for these points, and it does make sense. I feel negotiation and courage is really important. So, when was the time you had to apply these communication skills at your workplace or anywhere else?
Yeah, many times, Kanchan, but one point that, one case that particularly springs to mind was when I did a board evaluation, and that evaluation was very critical of the board chair. He was a very dominant personality, very task-oriented, didn't really spare people's feelings, and I had to therefore reveal the information, the results of the evaluation, which were not very favourable to him and were quite critical, actually. And knowing the personality of the chair, I was a bit concerned that I could be shot as a messenger. But fortunately for me, I'd built a good relationship with him. And so also I had to think about how I could soften the message, but still helping him to understand the message that had to be conveyed, because it was about improving performance. So I thought deeply about how to approach that. And I sort of used the coaching questioning style, listening to the viewpoint of the chair, but also helping him to see other perspectives as well. So between us, we sort of negotiated on how we could adapt his leadership style to become more productive, and that actually seemed to work amazingly. And so certainly in the next board meeting, he was a little less authoritative. So that was an example where I had to use that communication negotiation to combine the two. And so
well, that was a perfect example, I guess, for negotiating, questioning, and your coaching skills. I guess that really was a great approach.
And I think it's a combination of different skills, because again, we talked about listening as well, and you really have to listen well. When you're communicating, you have to understand all of the perspectives, and how can you do that unless you listen attentively? So that's very, very important. And so moving on to another, what I feel is a very key leadership skill, particularly at the moment, because we're all having to adapt to a unfamiliar situation. And, you know, evolution says that we adapt or die. And so we can be role models and agents for change, and we want to be able to evolve with the development of our business, and understanding that most organizations are fluid living organisms, and they're dynamic, and you have to evolve with it. So embracing change and disruption, the old saying of, oh, we've always done it this way, just no longer works, you know. So you can be an influencer to embrace change. And how can you do that? You can help depending on your role, to develop strategy, structure, people, even technology. I mean, all of these things will evolve in the agile organization. I was actually reading a very interesting article from McKinsey recently that explored the evolution of the organization from the old paradigm, which was organizations as machines, to the new paradigm, which is that organizations are living organisms that grow and evolve. And that organization therefore brings huge opportunities for growth and learning. But at the same time, of course, you have to be prepared to embrace and respond to disruption perhaps in your role, in your lifestyle, and the way that you do your work as well. And so there's 5 characteristics of agile organizations. Firstly, strategy usually is now a shared vision rather than it being imposed from above. Structure generally tends to be a flatter structure in a more agile organization. And the processes also support rapid decision making. And then the people within an agile organization tend to be more dynamic, cohesive, and also they work with passion as well. That's a very, very important EQ skill. And then, of course, technology as well is that sort of next generation enabling technology, that organizations that are fluid organisms, they embrace technology. So all of this means, you know, having a proactive and creative mindset, and that's the type of approach that will enable you to flourish in those types of organizations. And so being being proactive, adapting to new environments and situations. I know, Kanchan, you've had to adapt to new environments. You've already told us about moving countries. How do you adapt? What's your strategy for adapting?
Yeah, so adapting to a new country or environment, I believe, begins with embracing the local culture, but at the same time, not losing your self identity. You are what you are because of your upbringing, and that's the authentic you. So actually, we. So being flexible about cultural changes, embracing it with open arms, and contributing towards it is what we can do. So this contribution will come from your past learnings, which are connected obviously to our roots. So if you ask me what's the right strategy, I believe I have one word in my mind is harmony, and actually balance as well. So those are two words. So a harmony and balance of these two things is what really is important to adapt to new environments and situations.
I really like that harmony and balance. Yeah, absolutely. And then you can embrace change in a calmer way, and be at peace with yourself.
Right.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. And of course, sometimes when we do face change, inevitably there'll be conflict as well. And I think that as a leader, we're often faced with situations where we perhaps need to be a mediator. And again, often in people that I've dealt with, senior managers are made up of strong personalities who may clash, if you like, the A-type personalities. They'll always be prone to that type of behavior where, for example, we have to take the role of a mediator. I think it takes a lot of maturity to referee conflicts, and a great deal of empathy as well, to see both sides without actually taking sides, by staying neutral. And that means, you know, you've got to objectively work with the person, no matter what your views and whether they are convergent or divergent with theirs, and therefore show the respect to opposing viewpoints and the people holding those views. And this is why I think that the whole concept of empathy, people skills, sensitivity and subtlety in handling a conflict, and make it issues based. You know, that's the important thing, that a conflict at work should never be personal. It should be the objective is to try and cool tempers, and it should just be about the issues at hand and respecting everyone's viewpoint. I think that's the key thing around conflict resolution. So we've
Paul,
a highlight, Kanchan.
sorry. So Paul, I had a quick question for you over here. So I can imagine that a lot of our participants are parents today. So, and I know you have two children. When they were fighting, what approach did you take to mediate? It's a quick question.
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, as a parent, who here as a parent hasn't had conflict? I think the key thing for me really is keeping a cool head when they're fighting and arguing like cats and dogs. Absolutely got to keep a cool head. And one thing I've tried never to do in those situations is to take sides, and try and get each of my children to calm down and to explain their situation, and get the other person to listen, and we both listen. So we almost, like as a family meeting, we're we're assessing it from a position of neutrality, and therefore summarizing it, and sometimes breaking the tension with a little bit of humor. And then once we have eventually got to a resolution, and one thing I always as a principle say is that never shout. And obviously tempers may be frayed, especially with children, because they don't have that same degree of control. And so when tempers are frayed, I say, do not shout, just explain your point of view, and you will get heard much better if you're not shouting, and just explaining. And so ultimately, it comes down to just having that resolution and committing both parties, both of my children to that resolution. In other words, that they see it through. Absolutely tough job. But being a parent really trains you well to be a leader as well. And so with that, I just wanted to bring in another poll as well at this point. And the poll here is around leadership attributes. And I'm very interested to hear from the audience what their leadership attributes are. Just bear with me 1 second, and I'm just going to come to the next poll. Okay, I'm just having a few issues there. You know what? I'll come back to the poll actually, because I'm just having a few technical difficulties in getting to the next poll. So just bear with me 1 second. Okay. So we'll just move on to, I wanted now to talk about emotional intelligence, and self-awareness and self-regulation, I think, are one of the key aspects of emotional intelligence. And this is the ability to identify your emotions and accepting that you have feelings and determining why those emotions, those feelings have actually occurred. So with practice, you can learn to recognize your emotions and your feelings, and pay attention to those behaviors so that you can trace them back to the source. And also about paying attention to your body's reaction to emotions as well, because they can have real physical long-term side effects if we don't properly manage them. And so it really means being able to control, interpreting your emotional responses, and therefore being able to control them, because your thoughts and your experiences and your behavior are also intimately interconnected. And so you need to be able to analyze when your emotional response is disproportionate to the situation. And being self-aware means that you're able to do that a lot better. And so therefore you don't then become a victim of your own emotions. But that does take a little while, because as we've talked about before, when you're angry, you do have a choice as to how to respond. But it takes a while, because you have to form a habit. It generally takes about 21 to 30 days or so. And so emotions are a valuable tool, but it has to help us make responsible decisions. But in order to make appropriate decisions, we need to work at it for it to become a habit. Kanchan, how can we translate that self-awareness into the workplace, do you think?
Well, I think there are a lot of attributes to self-awareness at workplace. Firstly, it's integrity. Fundamental to the most professional roles, obviously, the job is untenable without it. It is where you can really start to build trust. Any suspicion and you are tainted. Secondly, it's honesty, straightforward in your dealings with people, ethical, making judgment calls that avoid conflict of interest, avoid situations where conflict could arise, doing the right thing, I believe, calling out bad behavior, having the courage to stand up and being heard, even at personal risk. So basically doing the right thing even when no one is watching. Being a role model, be a leader, set standards for your employees and even bosses. And I guess being an ambassador as well. So I want them to enjoy working with me and get value from it. So that's what your motto should be. Having a strong value system when I look at myself in the mirror at the end of the working day and I say I did my best or did what I felt right at least. So then we speak about personal brand. Paul, I have a question for you over here. So what do you mean by personal brand? If I can just ask you as a simple question, personal brand not related to anything, just like what is your definition of personal brand?
Yeah, a personal brand I see as really how people perceive you. So what would they say about you if you're not in the room? How would they talk about you? And so I see it as your personal reputation. I think it's something that you have to work on a daily basis. And it is about building those relationships and being perhaps sometimes the go-to person, and building your own sense of values and your ability to be able to provide trusted advice. And so it's that sort of perception, really. But the one thing, of course, is that your reputation, your personal brand can really be ruined very, very quickly if your behavior is not is not appropriate to the situation. And so personal brand, very, very important, and something that you need to continue to work on. I think with that, we talked about self-awareness and self-regulation, and being able to control our emotions in order to provide more productive responses, and just that self-perception, how we see our inner selves, is very much part of that. We all have insecurities and anxieties, but having a keen sense of self-regard will just really help you to accept who you are with all your strengths and weaknesses. And we're often bound by limiting thoughts and negative self-talk, and comparing ourselves negatively to others. I think that's a common human failing, but equally, we are unique, independent people, and so I would certainly encourage you to not compare yourself against others, but to consider yourself as an independent, unique person. And that way, you're not using your mind to hold you back. You're using your mind to support you, and be able to regulate your emotions in productive ways. And of course, self-expression is the ability to therefore be able to constructively express your emotions. And therefore, it's about, for example, expressing your emotions in a way that's appropriate, being assertive and not aggressive, for example. So I know that this is something that I've sometimes found difficult with, just how to express emotions.
So Paul, I have a question for you. So what strategies have you used when you had a troubled colleague who was behaving in a way which you were not liking? So how did you handle this situation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that's one of the things that was very, very important for me is to, and again, perhaps some of those conflict resolution strategies come in here as well, is that keep it impersonal. It's not about the individual, it's about the issues that have been involved. And so what I would try to do is to try and understand their position. And how did I do that? Ask open questions. What was on your mind? Why did you behave that way? And also, one has to remember that so much of communication is around body language. Over half of it is body language. Nearly a third of it is tone of voice, and very, very little, about 7 to 10% the research suggests, is what's actually said. So really paying attention to my expression, their expression, postures and tone and all of that is a very, very important process. But again, actively listening and understanding the other person's viewpoint, even if they were completely at odds with my own. I think that was important, to try and understand the person. And yeah, but again, when I became exasperated, I had to use your strategy as well, Kanchan, which is to walk away from it sometimes. Okay, so moving on to another key aspect of emotional intelligence is self-motivation. And we've already talked about embracing and initiating change. And as we've said before, people with strong EQ are not afraid of change. In fact, they welcome it as a natural evolution. And we do need to be abreast of emerging trends as well, particularly in my role in governance. I need to understand what's coming down the tracks, and trying to be an influencer as well. I think that's something that's very, very important. And Kanchan, again, in your role now, how do you seek to be an influencer?
Well, there are a lot of points to this, but I believe having good relationships, developing ones, is also important, along with having strong technical knowledge, updating myself about the latest updates and technical expertise in our particular field, developing the leadership skills. We talked about such an expert judgment and the courage to make decisions. So working on your communication skills, most jobs require that you other people to cooperate and you collaborate. So I guess using line authority and working effectively is what is important to be an influencer, and having trust in your own knowledge and integrity and being honest to the work which we are doing every day is what would really work towards being a great influence, I believe.
Excellent, thank you. I think those are great points. I think also just having that courage when sometimes you're under fire and you may be questioned on your approach, and being able to articulate those points. And that way, and if you have a good relationship, you can be an influencer if you have strong views and you can back those up. And so being a thought leader, developing strong relationships, being able to stand your ground in situations, difficult situations, that's very, very important. So all of those points you raised, Kanchan, absolutely critical. And I think one of the key things here, of course, is that when we are under fire, having that resilience as well. And so I know that Kanchan, I think we've got a few students on the call as far as I know, but what challenges did you face as a student as well? How did you build your resilience to get past those challenges?
So I had a lot of strategies. Obviously, as students, I did not realize most of them, but if today you ask me, so the strategies which I would summarize them would be self-motivated, firstly, in the studies or in whatever I was pursuing, and not discouraged by failures. Obviously, as students, we tend to not clear some exams, um, not have good scores. So not being discouraged by failure is what is important. And I feel getting feedback from anyone is very important, because you need to have an open mindset and a growth mindset, and so that you can avoid those mistakes in future. Being more approachable and friendly, and obviously admitting mistakes, which I told. So having an end goal in mind is what would really be important to build your resilience, I feel. And having a laser focus on what you're doing, being dedicated to achieve your goals, never lose your focus. So having one focus, one at a time. So taking every day as one step at a time is also important towards being laser focused. And personally, when I encounter any setback and I feel angry or aggrieved about it, so I use sarcastic humor. That's my defense mechanism. So it's okay as long as your comments are not hurting anyone. So
Sure, yeah.
generally, having a sense of humor and laughing at events and laughing at yourself as well is also very important. And being sporting
So,
about things is important to have a great skill. This is a great skill to have in this stressful world, I believe.
oh,
You can
absolutely.
just keep it light sometimes.
So true, actually, not taking life too seriously.
Yeah.
That's very important. And I really liked your point about having the end in mind, that laser focus you called it as well. That's very important because, of course, you know, you need to have the resilience to think about the end goal and continue even in the face of adversity and when barriers and obstructions get in our way. Very easy to give up, but being resilient means that you see the end of it. And I absolutely agree with you that having a sense of humor just is a tension release as well. It really is very, very important. Now, I'm just conscious of time as well, and we have a few other points we wanted to raise. I hope everyone is okay just to continue for a few more minutes. I know we talked about a 7 o'clock finish, and I do want an opportunity as well for people to raise some questions as well at the end. So I'm just going to go through a few more areas that I think are very, very important for you to know as well. We've talked about empathy, very, very important, understanding the alternative view and also being effective listeners as well. And we've talked about it also being a very, very important conflict resolution tool as well. And so one thing with empathy, I think, is that you understand the impact and the consequences of your decisions on people, and you consider how other stakeholders are affected. And so I'm going to be controversial here, and I'm going to say that, in my opinion, women generally make better leaders because they in general, and I'm talking generally here, have more empathy than men. Kanchan, what do you think to that?
I absolutely, I am with you on this point. So I feel empathy allows us to be effectively listeners, good communicators, strong coaches. So when you're speaking to that person, you're explaining your problem, you're actually thinking from their angle, from their point of view. So I believe having empathy towards the other person actually makes you feel, and you put yourself in their shoes, and you understand and you realize what that person is going through. So there is a video on YouTube about I don't know if we can share it at later stage. There is a thin line between sympathy and empathy. So I strongly say that we should go ahead and watch that video, because that video actually gives you the importance of empathy, what really empathy is. It's not sympathizing with the opposite person, but empathizing. So it's more about compassion and having true compassion towards the opposite person, and what best you can do to alleviate their suffering. So I guess
I really
that's
like
about
that.
empathy.
Yeah, I really like that approach. Compassion. That's a very powerful word, isn't it? Around being a leader as well,
Yeah.
compassionate leader. And it's one of the key attributes of a strong leader is compassion. Really, really important. And of course, one of the other things, of course, is the ability. We've talked about relationship building and just being a team player, having being a good team player and being realistic enough to know that as a leader, you can't always do it on your own. And I think giving feedback is a important skill, and in my experience, is often done badly, quite frankly.
So Paul, I have these curious questions in between for you. One more over here. So how do you approach the delicate art of giving feedback? How do you do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think as a working in senior positions, particularly as you go through the ranks, you need to be able to give feedback well. And one of the principles that I always followed was to criticize the act, not the person, because otherwise you can quickly demoralize them. But also, when you give feedback, it should be relatively immediate as well. The longer you wait, the less impact it has. And when you give feedback, also tell them what they could do to do better next time. It doesn't help anyone if you say to someone, "Oh, you didn't do that very well," and leave it at that, because they're going to say, "Well, why? What have I done?" You're too generic. So you have to say what you should be doing in order to have more impact. And so there's some of the strategies I will use in giving feedback. Also, of course, to listen to their point of view as well, so that we arrive at a solution or a way forward where both parties are comfortable with it as well. And I think, talking about the team and the social skills and being a team player, I think it's also important to be humble as well. What I mean by that is not always take the credit for the work of your team, sharing their success as well, and the respect and recognition that they deserve as well. And so if you treat everyone with that sort of dignity, then they let others sometimes take the glory, and consider we're not here for personal gain. You'll get more respect, and you'll get people that are devoted and loyal to you. And of course, the other thing with a team, when you're running a team, is being a good coach and helping them to develop. And we talked about feedback, how important that is. But also through delegation as well. Give them challenges and tasks that will take them outside of their comfort zone. It's a great opportunity to build skills in your team. And remember also that coaching or mentoring perhaps is a great way of developing your EQ skills, but it's a consistent and constant process. It's not a 6-month appraisal time and so on. It's a opportunity to continually provide feedback and communication and development for the individual, and also it's going to develop your own skills as well. And I think that being a good coach and a good mentor is a big plus for your personal brand as well. And like I say, you know, a good team player will also embrace change and welcome it, and be able to support the team through changes as well. Okay, very briefly talk about transparency and integrity. A couple of things, Kanchan, that you wanted to raise about transparency and integrity. Where do you see that?
Yeah, I guess organizations need to be more transparent in their external reporting, for example, financial statements, but often fail internally to be transparent. So this can definitely leave people feeling vulnerable. So when you're transparent, we do not have any hidden agendas. So there are no politics in play. So which is obviously unusual in most large organizations. So think about your own principles and maybe even write them down and keeping them close. This will provide security in that your identity and sense of worth is contained in those principles. So I guess this would definitely act as a guide and direction in life and provide wisdom and a sense of balance to make the right judgment call. And principles are generally fixed and unchanging. So they can definitely guide our actions and help us making the right call. And we obviously need to demonstrate honesty and integrity because this is our personal brand. So if people perceive you as such, your circle of influence will definitely expand. And I believe integrity as doing the right thing, even when no one is watching, as I told, is also very important because um, what all it comes down to a strong value system is important morally as well. So
I think that's a great point. Do the right thing when no one's watching. Is having that moral compass, as it were, absolutely critical. So these are key skills, isn't it? And this will really enhance your personal brand if you have that strong value system. So some great points here. And of course, I'm just going to briefly talk about emotional, organizational awareness and as an emotional intelligence skill, because that's also being able to understand the organization and the culture and the power base and understanding the political sensitivities around the organization. And that will also help you to be a strong influencer within the organization, because particularly larger organizations, they may have a lot of politics in play. And I have to say that I've always been very, very poor at understanding the political machinations that go on in organizations. And what I've done is I've focused on being authentic and genuine and not necessarily getting involved too much in the politics, but trying to understand who the power brokers are. And sometimes you are dealing with egos and differences of opinion. So therefore the relationship building, absolutely, again, critical to making sure that you sometimes, even in political situations, that you don't get yourself into awkward situations. And again, it really is about building trust. Your personal brand, your integrity, all comes down to how you then foster trust within the organization. And so what do you perceive as fostering trust, Kanchan?
yeah, I guess not getting into the politics, as you mentioned, is absolutely correct. But at the same time, understanding the politics of the organization is equally important. And giving good, sound technical advice and having faith on your research. Don't bluff because that's what would break the trust. Being proactive and providing your managers with the right information at the right time would definitely lead to fostering trust and finding the relevant articles and information at the correct time. Be a go, being a go-getter basically. So, and developing an attitude that is towards resolving issues and not the one creating issues. So, I believe this is important to foster trust and build faith on your colleagues, on your seniors, in any part of your relationships.
Excellent. That's a great point. So I think very, very important to be a go-to person.
Yeah. So when we're talking about trust, building trust, Paul, I have a question for you. So building trust obviously comes from sensitivity and objectivity, which we need to show in certain situations. So how do you demonstrate this in the workplace?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kanchan, and I can think of my role, for example, when I'm at a board meeting and understanding, sometimes it's understanding the body language and the atmosphere in the room and the situations where conflict could emerge. I think that's important to be able to really just have a sense of what's going on. And so also again, just being able to communicate and facilitate well in that, for example, when I'm setting up a board meeting, I need to make sure that everything is in place. I need to understand the director's concerns objectively and show sensitivity to that as well, so that I can serve them in the way that they would expect to be served. And of course, the other thing as well is that sometimes I've been called upon to make judgments, sometimes in board meetings, where I've had to think very, very quickly on my feet around issues. And so understanding the issues that are coming into play, being a good listener and understanding what's being said, and then also being able to really have a full grasp of the issues. And sometimes that takes technical acumen to do that. And really, I think one point for me is making sure I fully understood the board papers and what was being discussed, because of course that helps me in my record keeping, but it also helps me if I do get asked questions by directors. So just having that sensitivity, I think, is very, very important, and that applies across any profession as well. And again, just understanding where people are coming from and what their concerns are. So I think that really just about brings us to the end, and I'm very, very grateful for people sticking with us. We've just gone slightly beyond time, but I just wanted to really just summarize some of the key points that we talked about today. And having these non-technical skills makes you really, I think, a better leader and a colleague, but also a better person as well. And I think it's critical for any profession in handling powerful people like senior management, CEOs. It also gives you, I think, considerable health benefits in regulating your emotions, less stress, no heart or blood pressure issues. You talked about optimism, Kanchan, earlier as well. It just makes you happier as well, more content with life. What other benefits do you see? Just summarising some of the things we've talked about, Kanchan. Kanchan, you're just on mute there.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. So we can train to develop these non-technical skills, but obviously it takes time and patience. So just hang in there. The ability to be self-aware and regulate your emotions is obviously a highly valued skill in the modern workplace. So there's a simple formula to this: good technical knowledge plus strong non-technical skills is equal to a successful and happy professional. That's a simple formula. Obviously, it requires hard work, but is equal to is a very great one, a result.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's the important thing, is how you apply it in the workplace. So we've learned about some of the strategies today and the various elements of EQ, and so much to it. We've only really today, I think, scratched the surface, but imagine what you can achieve. Imagine the possibilities if you're really adept at this, and opportunities, I think, will flow your way. And I think it is a case of really getting more advice and practicing on these EQ skills, and also being patient as well, because it does take time as well. And so with that, I want to thank everyone for being here. And I'm gonna take my screen off now, because I'd like to invite the audience, the participants, to raise any questions. I haven't had the opportunity to review the chat function, but I'm going to have a quick look at that now. But if there's any particular questions that anyone has, please feel free to take yourself off mute and raise those questions with myself or Kanchan. Do we have any questions? I'm just looking at the a question from Mark Owen, more of a comment actually. So Mark says that it's not just managing relationships in the workplace, but at home and in our personal lives as well. And this for me has been a significant benefit of EQ. So I absolutely agree with you in that respect, for sure. Another point was made, 90% of top performers score high in EQ, just 20% of low performers score high on EI and EQ. So I think that highlights the fact that it is so important to have EQ if you're going to be one of those top performers. And then during this COVID era of increased remote interactions, EQ is even more important than ever, as so many people are experiencing stress. I couldn't agree more. I think that's one of the key things here. Very, very important for us as individuals to support each other. And so with that, if there's any other questions, I'm just adjusting my screen here. There we are. And if there's any other questions from the participants. I think then that if there's not any more questions from the participants, we've done a good job then, Kanchan.
So, sorry, Paul, just to let you, this is Amit here.
Hi, Amit.
Yeah, I find it was very helpful, your presentation. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
And yeah, I'm kind of in a situation where I'm trying to adapt to change.
Yeah.
And I'm starting a new business, trying to establish relationships with different parts of my business.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be quite frustrating, because I think when you don't feel you're making progress, that kind of affects your ability to move on.
Yes.
And you have to stop having that brain freeze, and you need to, somehow. You made a comment saying some people embrace change.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of developing that skill, that ability. So yeah, if there's any sort of pointers you have, just let me know in terms of how to embrace something which could be a positive thing or a negative thing. How do I take that negative thing and make a positive out of it?
It's a great question, Amit. And of course, embracing change is a skill that really doesn't come naturally to all of us. And I think one of the things that when you are starting something new, you're going outside of your comfort zone as well. Inevitably, you're going to be in situations that you're not totally comfortable with. And I think that we talked about not taking life too seriously. And of course, it's important that we have goals in mind, and we need to be resilient about that. But it's equally about just being able to not take yourself too seriously as well. In other words, what I mean by that, Amit, is if something goes wrong, because you've been outside of your comfort zone, don't beat yourself up about it. Say, okay, what did I learn from this? How can I do better next time? And so as you move forward, you're more at peace with yourself, and you're more willing, therefore, to stretch yourself into new situations and new changes, because you're not being so hard on yourself. And I think that's very important to understand that, you have your strengths and weaknesses. We all do. You're a unique person, and therefore, when you look at changes, don't be too hard on yourself if you sometimes fall down, and just get back up and keep trying. And so that's an important principle, I think, and that will enable you to be more comfortable about how you deal with changes and even just general stresses in your life.
So hey, Paul, it's
Great,
Jim.
thank you.
Thanks, Amit, for that question. Jim, you had a question, I believe.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you both for the presentation. It was really good and very informative. But I agree, like you're just scratching the surface in a very big theme and topic in an hour. So it's kudos for that. But to your point, like you could have spent 8 hours on all this, to be honest with you.
It's huge.
Because
It's huge.
there's so many dimensions, right? Like that you can sort of expand and expand on. But
Yes.
but in any case, so one of the things that sort of popped out at me is and you might want to look at a way to sort of incorporate that in the future. I'd be interested in people's thoughts. It's this notion of challenging the status quo, right? I think I was trying to figure out where in the leadership discussion and under what subtopic that could be fit in. And then also I think it's part of EQ as well, right? So on the EQ side, it's, I would say, respectfully challenging the status quo.
Yes.
And then under leadership, it's, challenge the status quo, but you should be respectful there too, right? But I do feel that's a big dimension, a big dimension of leadership and EQ.
It absolutely is, Jim, and it's one of those areas that I think people are very, very uncomfortable with because they don't know how to approach it. And one of the key skills, EQ skills, is assertiveness as well, is being able to stand your ground. And if you're an assertive person, then you're more comfortable with the ability to challenge the status quo. But it does take a lot of courage as well to do that. And so I think a couple of tips, if you like, to doing that is understanding the politics of the organization. We talked about that, we touched on that briefly, the organizational awareness, but also making sure that your relationships can survive that challenge. In other words, if you challenge a status quo, you want to make sure that you're on fairly firm ground. In other words, that your relationships with the people you're challenging are strong enough to survive that challenge, but equally that you've got your facts in place and you've got the arguments to substantiate them as well. And so if you do that and you have a strong argument and you deliver it in a respectful manner, then I don't think it's very, very difficult for anyone to criticize you for doing that. Because, when I look at my career, my profession, I've been in situations of conflict many times, particularly as a governance professional, where I've had to call out bad behavior, or I've had to make judgment calls, or I've had to, as you rightly mentioned, Jim, challenge the status quo. And yeah, it's uncomfortable, but if you follow some of those tips, then you should be on relatively firm ground. What are your thoughts, Jim? I mean, have you come across that situation, and how have you approached it?
No, yeah, I'm not presenting it because and I appreciate the tips. I kind of feel that that's one thing that I've developed, and one of the things in my sort of core competencies that has led me to a little bit more success. But I agree with you that if you're sort of putting up that challenge to an audience that is not a championing audience, then no matter how good you're empathetic or you're doing it in a respectful way, you could still get knocked down, right? So in that case, like, but you got to be bold enough to try if it's within your belief, right?
Yeah, sure. We talked about courage under fire, didn't we, as well? And yeah, sometimes you're going to be under fire, and sometimes you're not going to be the flavor of the month, that's for sure. And that's why having those good relationships in the first place is important, because it gives you, it's almost like you have this sort of emotional bank account. In other words, if they don't like what you said, well, okay, it's not going to kill you or your career. You can withstand it. But like I say, researching it, I think that the points you made, Jim, is absolutely spot on. We do need to have the courage sometimes to stick our neck out. Thanks for that, Jim. That's a great question, though. Good. So is there any other questions from the participants? I appreciate that we've gone over time slightly, and I'm very, very grateful for you all sticking with us and listening to what our thoughts were. And I'm very, very keen and curious to get your feedback as well, if you felt that there was usefulness in this session, and that you've got some tips and insights that you can take back into your workplace. And as Jim rightly mentioned, you know, we have only really scratched the surface, and I do provide more in-depth training on some of those areas that we've touched upon today, because as Jim rightly mentioned, you know, each one of them is a subject in its own right and a particular skill that takes a lot of practice. And so always welcome to touch base with any of you to explore some of these areas in more depth later on. And Kanch and I would be happy to take any questions after the webinar. But with that said, I hope that everyone enjoyed the session, got some useful insights, and once again, just want to thank you for attending today's webinar. And I hope all of you enjoy the rest of your evening or night time in some cases. And UK, I'm sorry I've kept you up a bit beyond your bedtime, those of you in the UK, but thanks everyone, and speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.